James Davies, Cracked, Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good. Dive into a thought-provoking exploration of psychiatry and its shortcomings in Cracked, Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good by James Davies. Throughout this summary, you'll uncover the startling subjectivity of psychiatric diagnoses, the questionable methodology behind the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, and the dubious influence of Big Pharma on the mental health industry. Learn how medicalization has skyrocketed the rate of diagnosed mental illnesses and question the effectiveness of antidepressants. This summary will encourage you to rethink your perception of psychiatry and challenge you to seek a more comprehensive understanding of mental health treatment.
The unreliability of psychiatric diagnoses. When it comes to mental health diagnosis, certainty is a luxury not often granted. Despite the existence of standardized diagnostic criteria, research proves that the process remains highly subjective. Patients with the same symptoms can receive different diagnoses based on factors like geographical location and the psychiatrist's personal evaluations. These inconsistencies call into question the efficacy of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, and the entire field of psychiatry. If you've ever struggled with a mental health issue, you might wonder how reliable a psychiatrist's diagnosis could be. Unfortunately, the honest answer is that it's not as dependable as we would hope. Even with a standardized guide, like the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, the diagnostic process is swayed by individual interpretation and regional tendencies. To illustrate the problem, consider Dr. David Rosenhan's experiment, in which he sent 8 researchers to different hospitals with the same symptom, hearing the word thud in their heads. All participants were diagnosed with different disorders and prescribed strong medications. Despite revealing their involvement in the study, most were held in hospitals for weeks. This experiment highlights the concerning fact that psychiatrist consensus on patient diagnoses is only around 32 to 42%. Additionally, country-specific trends exist. Psychiatrists in the US and Russia are twice as likely to diagnose patients with schizophrenia compared to European practitioners. The status of the DSM as the ultimate authority in psychiatry further complicates matters. This manual, containing all known psychiatric disorders, has continued to evolve since its first edition published in 1952. Yet, the contents are based on psychiatrist consensus rather than scientific research. The DSM's inclusion of homosexuality as a mental disease in DSM-2, ultimately removed following the gay rights movement in the 1970s, illustrates this flaw. Unlike other medical fields, where objective criteria like X-rays inform diagnoses, psychiatrists often lack a clear benchmark. Consequently, achieving consensus among professionals in the field can be an uphill battle. This raises critical questions about the nature of psychiatric diagnoses and the path towards more reliable and objective methods. Debunking the DSM's objective. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, which psychiatrists rely upon for diagnosing mental disorders, is far from objective. Created by a small task force, it is influenced by the biases and preferences of its members, making decisions based on subjective measures instead of hard evidence. The resulting inconsistencies and insufficient research contribute to the questionable reliability of the DSM as a standard in the field of mental health. Concocting the esteemed DSM is no simple task, and the responsibility lies on the shoulders of a select group called the task force. However, the process they follow is far from scientific or reliable, as the narrow group of individuals votes on the contents that make it into the manual, rather than adhering to a strict evidence-based approach. This makes room for personal bias and the subjective influence of louder or more assertive task force members. Surprisingly, even members of the advisory committees describe the DSM development process to be akin to a group of friends choosing a dinner destination, highlighting the lack of objectivity in the procedure. This subjective decision-making process is further marred by underlying methodological errors and insufficient research that support the diagnoses of mental disorders. A glaring example is the inclusion of self-defeating personality disorder, SDPD, in the DSM. The disorder's functional addition was backed by a mere 2 scientific articles riddled with flaws and an unconvincing questionnaire where only 11% of psychiatrists agreed that the disorder belonged in the manual. Irrespective of the sparse evidence, Dr. Robert Spitzer, the then DSM task force leader, pushed for SDPD's inclusion, solely convinced of its necessity. It was only later that he admitted in an interview that the research wasn't adequate to justify the inclusion of new disorders in the DSM. Given the numerous imperfections, biases, and weak foundations, it's astounding that the DSM remains the go-to resource for diagnosing psychiatric disorders. Professionals and patients alike must be aware of the DSM's limitations in truly understanding mental health complexities. Diagnoses surge, illness or illusion. The rate of psychiatric diagnoses has skyrocketed in recent times, largely due to the often subjective nature of the DSM's classifications. From only 1% in the 1950s to a staggering 26.2% today, the broader definitions of mental illnesses contribute to overdiagnosing otherwise healthy individuals. This inflation can result from lack of context, such as children born at the end of the year being misdiagnosed with ADHD simply because they're younger than their classmates. This surge in diagnoses has fueled an explosion in treatments, with antidepressants prescribed at an alarming rate despite a lack of evidence supporting their effectiveness over placebos. As we proceed, we will delve deeper into the powerful pharmaceutical industry, known as Big Pharma, that lies at the center of this phenomenon. Debunking the chemical imbalance theory. Beyond the flaws of psychiatric diagnoses and the DSM, the pharmaceutical industry, or Big Pharma, has had significant influence over psychiatric medicine. In the 1990s, they had to revamp the image of psychiatric drugs from mind-altering substances to authentic medical products. To achieve this goal, they popularized the chemical imbalance theory, proposing that psychiatric issues stem from imbalances in neurotransmitters in the brain. By promoting this idea, pharmaceutical companies aimed to increase drug sales for conditions like depression. For instance, serotonin-specific reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, a class of antidepressants, were marketed as a way to correct chemical imbalances by altering neurotransmitter activity. However, the correlation between these drugs and a stabilized mental state is not as straightforward as the theory suggests. To fully comprehend the effects of psychiatric drugs, it is crucial to explore the construction of the brain's communication structures and the role of neurotransmitters in transmitting information between neurons. The chemical imbalance theory oversimplifies the complexities of the human brain, misleading both medical professionals and the general public. Debunking the chemical imbalance theory. The widely accepted chemical imbalance theory, often endorsed by pharmaceutical companies, oversimplifies the causes of psychiatric disorders. Research has yet to firmly measure and identify these imbalances, and biological factors alone cannot adequately explain the onset of mental disorders. Even medical experts, court cases, and the World Health Organization acknowledge that various psychological, sociological, and biological elements contribute to mental health issues. Therefore, we must be cautious of the pharmaceutical industry's biased push towards the chemical imbalance theory. The chemical imbalance theory, which suggests that psychiatric disorders can be traced to neatly identifiable causes and effects, has been heavily promoted by the pharmaceutical industry. However, several glaring issues with this theory remain unaddressed. Firstly, there is no definitive evidence to support the claim that chemical imbalances within the brain are accurately measurable, especially in cases of depression. As Dr. David Kaiser from Psychiatric Times points out, there is no existing test to diagnose chemical imbalances, and we have no concrete idea of what an ideal chemical balance would look like. Additionally, placing sole emphasis on biological causes is insufficient when trying to understand the emergence of mental disorders. Carol Bernstein, former president of the American Psychiatric Association, admits that the relationship between biology and mental disorders remains unclear. An example illustrating this issue is the legal battle between David Oakes and the American Psychological Association, APA. The APA misdiagnosed Oakes with schizophrenia in the 1970s, prescribed him potent antipsychotics, and confined him to a psychiatric ward. In 2003, the APA eventually admitted that there were no identifiable pathological lesions or genetic abnormalities in mental disorders. The World Health Organization's report, Facts and Figures Conquering Depression, highlights that the causes of psychiatric disorders are multifaceted, involving various psychological, sociological, and biological factors. While some disorders, such as Huntington's disease, are genetically influenced, these cases are the exception. Family history of depression, for instance, is more likely attributed to environmental factors than strictly biological causes. Despite these revelations, the pharmaceutical industry remains reliant on the chemical imbalance theory for profit, continuing to promote its flawed perspective. Antidepressants' double-edged effects. Antidepressants, particularly SSRIs, tend to cause a general reduction of emotions, not just negative ones. This emotional dampening can lead to individuals feeling disconnected and changed, similar to the effect of alcohol. Furthermore, the efficacy of drugs relies heavily on individual expectations and beliefs, as demonstrated in a study where participants mistakenly attributed stimulant and tranquilizer effects to sugar pills based on their color. This insight raises questions about the role of drug advertisements and their potential to manipulate consumers' expectations to induce a placebo effect rather than informing them of a drug's actual outcomes. Antidepressants aren't a one-size-fits-all solution for mental health. An Oxford University study found that most SSRI antidepressants don't just neutralize negative emotions, they also dampen positive ones. Consequently, people on SSRIs may feel disconnected from their surroundings and lose interest in their daily lives, experiencing a change in their personality. This emotional blunting is reminiscent of alcohol consumption, which similarly provides a temporary shift in mental state without addressing the root causes of one's problems. Another intriguing factor in drug efficacy is the power of expectation. A study revealed that participants mistakenly associated colors, red and blue, with stimulant and tranquilizer effects when fed identical sugar pills. This phenomenon suggests that drug companies might utilize advertisements to create expectations and amplify placebo effects, rather than informing the public about a medicine's actual potential impact. The dark side of Big Pharma. Pharmaceutical companies often hide negative research results, giving the illusion that their drugs are highly effective. Almost 90% of psychiatric research in the UK is funded by these pharma companies, allowing them to wield considerable influence over key opinion leaders. Furthermore, their vast advertising budgets overshadow actual research and development. Initiatives like the Physician Payment Sunshine Act, which mandates transparency in pharma funding, are few and far between, making it challenging to separate the influence of money from medicine. How can we account for the high rates of psychiatric drug prescriptions, all while facing a lack of definitive evidence of their effectiveness? The truth is quite disconcerting. Pharmaceutical companies strategically withhold certain research findings, only publicizing the positive outcomes. For instance, in 2004, GlaxoSmithKline was fined $2.5 million for not disclosing studies that revealed its antidepressant Paxil/Serexat to be less effective than placebos. Moreover, heavy pharma company funding to universities and researchers results in a significant boost to their academic and social reputation. In the UK, an overwhelming 90% of all psychiatric research receives financial support from these companies. They strategically target key opinion leaders such as doctors and professors who hold sway within the industry. It's not surprising then that 56% of the task force members who worked on the DSM-4 had financial connections to drug companies, with 88% of those responsible for diagnostic categories where drugs are the primary intervention method. Additionally, the emphasis on advertising, rather than research, ensures their continued success. During the mid-2000s, psychiatric drug companies in the UK spent a whopping £1.65 billion on marketing alone. While promotional jobs surged by 59% between 1994 and 2004, actual research-based positions experienced a decline. Efforts to separate financial interests from medicine are rare, but the 2013 Physician Payment Sunshine Act in the U.S. provided a glimmer of hope by requiring drug companies to disclose their university and research funding. However, more needs to be done globally to increase transparency and reduce the influence of big pharma on medicine. The myths of modern psychiatry. Throughout history, philosophers have explored life's meaning in the concept of existence after death, contributing to social myths. In modern times, we create social myths about our health, inquiring about the reasons for health issues and the road to cure. Current-day psychiatry primarily focuses on biological explanations for psychiatric disorders, overshadowing the comprehensive biopsychosocial model. This model acknowledges genetics, trauma, and environmental factors as contributors to psychological suffering. With increasing reliance on medication and a decline in long-term psychotherapy, the bio model is unfortunately becoming prevalent. When these social myths are accepted, society ceases questioning their legitimacy. This can result in people with psychiatric diagnoses being unfairly labeled as sick, which in turn alters societal perception and treatment of these individuals. A study at Auburn University supports this notion, revealing that people perceived to suffer from brain disorders were treated more harshly than those with sociological or psychological disorders. The skewed focus on sickness and biologically induced mental health disorders must be reconsidered, allowing for a more balanced and compassionate approach. Big Pharma's global impact. Big Pharma is significantly influencing global psychiatric treatments, introducing Western mental disorders to other countries and adapting their marketing strategies to target cultural nuances. For example, after anorexia nervosa gained media attention in Hong Kong, the rates of the disorder reached near epidemic levels. In Argentina, a pharmaceutical company successfully linked its antidepressants to globalization-related depression, becoming the market leader. The overarching question now is, how can we make people believe our pills will solve their problems? Big Pharma's growing influence on psychiatric treatments worldwide is undeniable. In recent decades, pharmaceutical companies have been exporting their drugs to various countries, consequently impacting the mental health landscape in these regions. This approach has led to an emergence of typically Western mental disorders in non-Western countries. Take a look at Hong Kong, where anorexia nervosa was nearly unheard of until 1994. A high-profile case of a teenage girl starving herself to death resulted in extensive media coverage, and the disorder's rates skyrocketed. Merely being aware of this devastating condition seemed to provide a way for people to express their internal suffering. Pharmaceutical companies recognize the power of tapping into culture-specific mental disorders and use this knowledge to adjust their marketing strategies. In Argentina, when the economy collapsed in the 1990s, the local pharmaceutical company Gator effectively related globalization to depression, outperforming its multinational competition, Eli Lilly. As a result, Gator's antidepressants became the market leader. This global expansion raises a critical question: how can drug companies convince people that their problems will vanish by merely taking a pill? Revamping psychiatry together. Psychiatry is on the cusp of a beneficial shift towards patient-centered treatment and a focus on social context. By adopting a more humble approach to psychiatric science, improving regulation of researcher-pharma relations, and encouraging students to critique their discipline, psychiatry can move towards a better future. Furthermore, public awareness of the dilemmas in psychiatry and the nature of mental disorders can drive change and push for more effective alternatives. Don't give up on psychiatry just yet. A transformative approach is on the horizon that could greatly benefit everyone. This new direction revolves around patient-centric treatment, where psychiatrists tailor individualized treatment plans to better meet each patient's needs. Dr. Sami Tamimi's work showcases the potential of this approach. He demonstrated that a non-diagnostic method in ADHD treatment, which focuses on social context rather than strictly matching diagnosis with medication, led to better rehabilitation rates and fewer hospitalizations for patients. The key to improving psychiatry isn't to outright condemn psychiatric drugs, but rather to create a balance within treatment methods. There are several ways in which psychiatrists can drive this paradigm shift. 1. Embrace humility as a science, acknowledging that some aspects of psychiatry are still inexplicable. 2. Implement more stringent regulations surrounding the relationship between researchers and pharmaceutical companies. 3. Encourage psychiatry students to apply healthy skepticism and critique to their chosen discipline. While the author believes these propositions may be unlikely, there's one final, more attainable solution: enlisting public support. By informing people about the dilemmas in psychiatry, the unique nature of mental disorders, and the deceptive marketing practices of Big Pharma, we can inspire a push for better alternatives. With increased awareness and collaborative efforts, we can create a brighter future for psychiatric care.
In the end, Cracked, Why Psychiatry is Doing More Harm Than Good brings to light the major flaws in modern psychiatry, stressing the importance of addressing biological, psychological, and social factors in mental health. James Davies exposes the unsettling influence of Big Pharma on psychiatric research and reveals the inadequate approaches taken in mental disorder diagnosis and treatment. As you conclude this summary, consider the need for a paradigm shift towards a more patient-centered, contextual, and comprehensive approach in psychiatry. By informing ourselves about these issues, we can demand better alternatives and create a positive change in mental health care.